Hello fellow chess assassins, welcome to my channel. Today you will be learning about disguising your attacks. So what does it mean to disguise your attack? There are various ways to do it. Disguising attacks in chess involves using masking combinations, moves that appear to serve a defensive or developmental purpose while secretly preparing a tactical strike. Okay, this is from Black's perspective. The game starts off from the ready opening, beginning with knight f3. Okay, I'm playing the black side, so my reply is d6. My idea is to at least cover the e5 square from this position. I know it doesn't look like a great move and everything, but my intention is to build my defense through sound development, and you'll see how. White intends to fianchetto the bishop on b2 with pressure along the a1 to h8 diagonal, e6. So I want to be solid here. I want these two pawns here, and these pawns indicate my intent to build a solid defense. Bishop b2 with pressure along that diagonal, and now knight f6. So developing the king side first, pawn to g3. White uses a strategy called the double fianchetto, and white wants to exert pressure along the a8 to h1 diagonal and also the a1 to h8 diagonal. So knight b to d7. And after that, bishop g2, and there's a double fianchetto. Bishop e7, preparing castling, both sides castle short. And after pawn at e3, this prepares the pawn thrust to d4. Rook e8, pawn to d4. Now look at this position. Look at black's position. The plan for black is subtle. These four pawns that you see that are highlighted are black's weapons to challenge white's center and to launch an attack on the king side particularly. But in this game, black will also deal with the queen side. Pawn to c5 is the first shot fired. So I fire the first shot challenging the pawn, and if d takes c5, then my reply is, it could be d takes c5. My rook defends the queen on d8. I have my rook on an open file. That's one idea. Another idea is to recapture with the knight. But in the game, knight on b to d2 was played. And now I make the capture, recapture, and now covering the b5 square. Pawn to c4. Pawn to h6, creating luft for the king. Knight on 2 to f3. Now it's time for me to start preparing the king side attack. But I have to be careful because with white's knight sitting on the d4 square, is applying pressure to this pawn on e6. So I got to be careful. My bishop right now is not so good. It's not a good bishop right now, so I need to get that bishop free to defend e6. Knight h7 is preparing the pawn push from f7 to f5, but I have to prepare queen e2 and now knight c5. The bishop on c8 now defends the pawn on e6, and also the knight on the c5 post is prepared to go to the a4 square should white play pawn to b4, kicking my knight. Knight will just hop to a4. Pawn to h4, grabbing space on the king side. And now e5 is the second shot fired. The knight cannot go to f5 because my bishop on c8 is now open. So knight c2, pawn to f5. Now my positional goal is coming to fruit. Okay, now this is a threat. This is a real threat. In this position, white pins the pawn to my queen and threatens to take the pawn on e5. And I won't be able to recapture because of the pin. So queen c7, knight b4. White is going to occupy the d5 post, planning to fork. So I bishop e6, and now rook on a to c1, followed by rook over to d8 from a8. Rooks belong on half open files and on open files. In this case, it's a half open file. Knight to d5, capture and recapture. And now white threatens to push this pawn to this square. So this is a threat. a5. Threat renewed with pawn to a3. And now queen d7 is played. So after this move, the knight hops to a4, attacking the bishop on b2. Bishop retreats to a1, and now capture, recapture. And with my queen on d7, I'm able to support the pawn on b5, which in turn supports the knight on a4. My knight is now on an absolute post. Cannot be kicked by any pawns. If my knight could be kicked by a pawn, then the post would be a relative post. But here, the knight is on an absolute post with pressure on b2 and c3. Now the game continued with rook c6, threatening to capture my pawn. Rook b8. Now white exploits the pawn on f5, but the pawn is defended, but I just strengthen it by adding another defender called overprotection. h5, and now knight f6. What is the idea? After capturing, knight g4. Pay close attention to the maneuvers that blacks made so far. Disguising attacks in chess involves using masking combinations, moves that appear to be defensive, which is what black is doing, and is secretly preparing a strike on white's king side. And one classic example is non-threatening moves that coordinate your pieces. So notice how both of black's bishops are being restrained by d6 and e5, which restrains the bishop on a1, and the knight defended by the pawn here restrains the bishop on h3. Knight h4 and pawn to h5. White continues to create or try to create a weakness on my king side. In between move, if his bishop captures on h4 and after recapturing. Now rook to f8. Notice how this is an x-ray. My knight on g4 and my rook on f8. Both x-ray the pawn on f2. f4. Capture. Capture. In between move. Rook on b to e8 attacks the queen. Now my rook is on an open file. Now white can capture the pawn on b5, but the problem is now I have some good options here. I have queen over to a7, and I can deliver check on a7. Another idea is notice how there are threats such as rook to e3 followed by rook over to g3 check or capture the bishop. White continue here because of the weakness on the second and third ranks. Capturing the pawn on f5 first, and this pawn isn't going anywhere. Now, bishop a1 with pressure along the a1 to h8 diagonal. White's rook on d6 covers the pawn. On g6, which is a dangerous pawn, that pawn can go to g7. So what do I do? Rook e3 hits the queen and also x-rays the bishop. And if bishop captures the knight, I'll recapture with pawn, and I'll have two strong pawns there. And also the queen can go at some point to this square here. Played in the game was queen f1. Now I can play rook captures bishop, but maybe I shouldn't play that. I don't think that would be such a good move to capture because the queen is defending the bishop, but I can call check on g3, rook over to g3, which is probably what I should have done. I should have played rook here, delivering check to the king, and the king would be forced to either play bishop g2 or king over to h1. But queen to c2 is another move. This is a classic example of the subtleties in the position. White challenged my rook and failed to note that the knight and queen both attacked the h2 square. And little did he know, checkmate is delivered. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to hit that like button, share and subscribe.